Just to let folks know, we have opened up the Zoom meeting, so our camera is recording. We'll get started here in just a couple of minutes, once we give people a chance to log in. All right, welcome. I will now call this meeting of the South Liberty School District to order. We will begin with our land acknowledgement. I'll turn to Marnie Jackson.
Thank you. I'm going to just speak the land acknowledgement from my heart rather than from the paper, but it is available on our district website and on the wall in this room and in the online notes for this meeting agenda, if you'd like to see the written version. South Liberty School District acknowledges that we are on the ancestral homelands of the Lower Skagit, Tulalip, Swinomish, Snohomish, Stillaguamish, and Suquamish peoples. And this is land that has been their ancestral home and remains their ancestral home, and with which they have a deep spiritual tie. We honor and acknowledge their stewardship of these lands and waters, their continued presence, their rich cultural history and cultural future, and the opportunity to continue to deepen in relationship with both the first peoples of these lands and with our own family stories and our own lineage and placekeeping that we each have in our own family histories. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate the change that you've gone to just speaking in the moment. I like that for keeping us current and not just reciting. Thank you. This is a business workshop, so there's a chance for the board to receive comment, receive presentations, and discuss amongst itself. Just as a reminder, we will not be having discussions with members of the public, but we will have an opportunity for public comment. If you are online and would like to make public comment, please note your name and your location in the Q&A function and hit enter, just so we know that you want to say something, and then you can start typing your comment, and I will be quite willing to read it once it's all set and ready and at the appropriate time. We'll now move on to the agenda, and if people want to make comment here in person, please contact Mrs. Macaro in the back and get your name and location on that list. Thank you for the reminder, Dr. Moshe. We'll now move on to agenda and minutes. As I try to remember the exact magic words here, are there any objections to approving the agenda and minutes as presented? Hearing none, the agenda and minutes as presented are approved. We'll move on to the consent agenda. Are there any objections to approving the consent agenda as presented? Hearing none, our consent agenda is likewise approved. We'll now move on to presentations. We're lucky enough to have our English language arts, social studies, and ethnic studies programs. I'll turn it over to Dr. Moshe.
Thank you all for coming tonight and presenting for us. I'm going to turn it over to Kayla Phillips, who is coordinating curriculum for us and has arranged for tonight's presentation. So thank you, Kayla.
Thank you. I'll talk for a couple minutes. We're going to try to coordinate what's on the screen, but also knowing we want to talk to you. So yeah, I have 4 educators here tonight. This is the first of many panels. So we'll have plenty of people. I let them know that many will have the opportunity throughout the year to come and talk to you about some of the work that they do. So tonight I have Kristen Coda, Michelle Zizette, they teach 2nd grade. I have Kyla Stelling, she teaches 9th grade ethnic studies, and Christine Reed, she teaches 8th grade ELA. So I'll give you guys a little snapshot about what's going on kind of K-12 with specificity to ELA, partially because we're in a pilot year for that, and then they'll speak more in depth to that. So K-12 adopted a couple years ago. Last year was their first full year, not in a pilot year, using a curriculum called Collaborative Classroom, being a reader, being a writer, and they'll go over a little depth with that for you. So this is kind of our first full, knock on wood, uninterrupted year with it. The 3rd through 5th grade team, we have a pilot. We are in full pilot mode right now. We met just this morning to get an update. Our first pilot, we're doing a 12-week pilot on a program called Into Reading. Started it on the 12th and we'll end in November. So we have 5 teachers amongst multiple grade levels implementing that right now. We're looking in Q3 to another program called Amplify Reading, which a lot of districts around us have recently adopted. That's one we're interested in. It's going to be contingent on, there's a lot of supply chain issues that are impacting their publication. So we're hopeful that that'll be our second pilot. We have another one that we're considering as well. So we'll see after this one, which one we're going to pick and do in Q3. Our 7-12 team is working really well together. We're looking at piloting a variety of materials, texts, and really working to do some sequencing in our vertical alignment of what are the skills and what they're working on in 7th grade, and then how does that build through their until they graduate. So we're doing that to reflect Common Core state standards, our district values, and then those culturally responsive teaching practices. Ms. Reed will highlight a program we are working on this year called Parlay. Another one is Membeam, which is a focus in vocabulary. When we start to look at our data, we're seeing a dip in some of our vocabulary needs. So there's a pretty slick online program that's a nice supplement to curriculum and instruction. We're looking at novel selection and how we find those culturally responsive reads that kids are hungry for, coming to the library for, we have wait lists for, and comparing them to our rubric to make sure they're going to be what we're going to want to invest in over time. And then our 10 to 12th grade classes, and it's kind of a flip a little bit because we have an AP course and then a couple 10 and 11 doing a program called Horton, and they're in a curriculum pilot. They were generous enough to let us pilot it for the entire year because 95% of their materials are online only. So we have teachers that are able to pilot that for a long extended amount of time. And the AP class is really enjoying that so far, and you're not yet seniors yet. So maybe next year you can fill us in on that. So that's kind of a snapshot as to kind of what's going on in classrooms right now. I can give you that, but if you want the depth, which I'm sure you're hungry for, I'm going to have Kristen Coda and Michelle Zizette come speak about what's going on in their readers and writers. Yeah. Here, you want
the teaching with my back to my audience here. So last year we implemented the collaborative classroom, being a reader and being a writer. And these, we have access to, let me put this down, print teacher materials. These are our teacher's manuals for 2nd grade, but we also have a wonderful online teacher portal that gives us access to all of it together in one place. But also if we need instructional video, we can click and see somebody teaching or answering a question that we have maybe about what's going on if we don't. These are the instructional practices for each of the grade levels, K1 and 2, the things that we're teaching, and they funnel down into the instructional strands. And you can see that kindergarten, 1st and 2nd, we're all working on reading vocabulary, small group and reading, small group reading and independent work. But in kindergarten, they're focusing on letter names. And in kindergarten 1st, they work on handwriting. In 2nd grade, we add word study.
So for our reading instruction, we use mentor text. A mentor text is read aloud to a class each week during whole group instruction, which leads to teacher-directed class discussions. The focus here is on comprehension, the ability to comprehend text. And we do that by teaching these comprehension strategies through discussion. Next slide. Our vocabulary is taught explicitly through vocabulary words which are first introduced in context through the mentor text that I just spoke about, then explicitly taught with student-friendly definitions. We engage students through eliciting prior word knowledge. So we get them speaking to each other. Have you heard this word before? And they'll say, oh, you know, my grandma said that before. And they'll say what their grandma said. Students will practice the word through a variety of spoken word games and partners as a class. So getting them to get used to speaking the word. There's multiple exposures to the word over an extended period of time. And it's really sweet when you hear it come up in the vocabulary because you know it's sticking. Next slide, please.
Large component of our reading program is small group instruction. This happens almost every day, as well as independent work. And while we're working in those leveled reading groups, the rest of the class is working on this independent work, word work, independent reading, and independent writing. And right now, we're just getting them used to that. What's the routine? What's expected when they're working quietly? What are your choices when you do word work and independent and reading and writing? So that when we are working in our small group reading groups, those kids are working quietly and independently, and they know what the plan is because we're practicing right now. Me too. Second grade, like I said, we added word study, which is really examining the patterns and similarities in words. We do this through a lot of word sorting. We do that whole group. We do it in partners. They do it individually. They write it down in their word study books. And then later in the year, we're going to add guided spelling, and we do that large group, but we also do it in our small group work as well.
For the being a writer, we chose this quote out of the teacher's manual because it really highlights the importance of motivation. So I assume you all can see that, and I'm not sure if online can see it as well, but motivation, as many educators know, leads to engagement, and engagement leads to learning. So the fact that this is kind of right in the beginning of the teacher's manual, and it's inspiring teachers to make sure there's motivation in what they're teaching. And it shows up in the curriculum. There's a mentor text for our Being a Writing program as well in kindergarten, first and second grade. There's this mentor text serves as inspiration for writing or insight into an author's craft. We have, oh, sorry, can you go back one more time? We have guided practice writing, which is where the teacher models thinking aloud. So this is pretty direct instruction, though it can seem implicit in some ways. And students are introduced to how they're supposed to be writing when the teacher is modeling it. Then we have shared writing, where a teacher invites the class to do a writing with them. And then this is a really great time to just hear students thinking and then see a whole class come up with a story. So here they are getting motivated and engaged to do their own writing. Next slide. So each writing lesson has these three main components, though it may occur over one day, a couple of days, or even a whole week the lesson takes place. The first step is getting ready to write. This is where we refer to those mentor texts and have our direct instruction and share ideas. So we share ideas in a circle, and we're at the easel and like, what are you going to write about? And tell me more. And then it's writing time. So now they're ready to write, they're engaged, and they have sustained writing without disruption, which is a skill we are growing in second grade. They're doing pretty good. I think we're up to like 15 minutes or so. During this time, the teacher and the student get opportunities to have conferences. And so the teacher gets to read the students' writing, talk to them. What are you writing? Tell me more. And then they get to review what else they can add and where they can grow. And then sharing and reflecting. This happens as a class and with partners.
We put some writing samples in. The first student, this is this year. So the first student is an emerging writer. They're telling their story through pictures as well as orally. The second writer you can see is adding some characters to their picture plan and some words, and they're playing with punctuation. The third writer is adding more detail to their setting and their picture plan and adding more lengthy sentences, more sentences, and playing with punctuation and capitalization and good spacing there. And the last slide has a student that just doesn't need the picture plan at all. They're just going for it. And maybe when we meet in our writing conference, we might talk with a student about just those things, punctuation and that type of thing. But they're on it and they're motivated and they're writing lengthy stories.
And they wanted us to know that it's fiction.
Yeah, fiction.
In case you didn't know.
I think that's all we have.
I just really want to thank Michelle and Kristen. You two have taken such a leadership role in this curriculum and serving as mentors and supports to the other teachers. I'm just really grateful for the hard work you've put in to make this happen. So thank you.
You might be wondering why we're going from 2nd to 8th grade. Well, that 3-5 team, they are working so hard at that pilot, and you're going to hear from them in the spring. So I let them off on this one. But I will say I sat in on, we had a curriculum planning meeting today, and then we Zoomed with one of, with our point of sale person through HMH. And what they were doing, it was helping us navigate through the platform. And we were talking about some of the areas that we're starting to notice our new 3rd graders are still having some gaps from those COVID years in kindergarten or 1st grade. And they were showing us some really cool intervention strategies and ways to filter through thousands of components of materials to find things that are going to target that area, like phonological awareness, but then do it with a skill, but then also something that's going to be of high interest to the reader. So you might find 8 sources of reading or a component of it. And then the idea was have the kids select which story sounds of most interest to them. And you can track that online. So it's going to show you and embed right there how they're progressing versus waiting for one of those, more formal benchmarks like iReady. So that's kind of what 3-5 is doing. So I wanted to give them a little, pause, knowing that they're working hard there. I popped into 7th grade English today, and they started book clubs last week. So Miss Donnelly handed me the rubric for the dialogue and conversation, and there were sentence starters on the board. And they had to ask each other about the character development. What's your theme? They had to throw out an opposite idea to maybe what the reader had understood so far. There's a lot of really cool dialogue amongst groups. Their books were similar in theme or of interest. So you might have had a buddy in your group or someone who just had found a novel similar to yours. So that was a pretty cool experience. I got to go and be a part of it and ask questions, but also kind of just hear about how they're using and practicing their critical thinking skills together. And then whenever I pop into Miss Reed's classroom, 8th grade English language arts, I'm always super impressed. So I'll let her speak to what she does on the day-to-day.
At the middle school level for language arts, we started off by thinking about our approach to teaching. And in our classrooms, we have that reading and writing workshop model, which we were inspired by Penny Kittle, Rebecca Odell. So a typical day in my classroom, we start off with independent reading. So that's based off of choice. Then students are interacting in their notebooks. It could be a response to a poem. It could be asking a would you rather question. It's just time to write down their thoughts. Followed by a mini lesson. This could last 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And then there's always time to practice what they learned in that mini lesson. So usually interacting with a shared text or a text of choice. And that's the same with writing as well. Independent reading is really, really valuable in our classroom. Last year, we implemented it all year long, where they were reading every day for 10 minutes. We got some really positive feedback last year from surveys and just parents sharing during parent conferences at the end of the year. One parent mentioned that their child has read more books this year than he has in years. Some student feedback, I could read my own book. It was good because I don't normally like to read. So it's all about choice during this time. And another student said, although I like the stories we read as a class, my favorite was when I got to read my own book because I got to pick it based off of what kind of books I like to read. And during this independent reading time too, they're also have that chance to practice what they're learning in that mini lesson too. This year, we're gonna pilot the novel, The Crossover by Kwame Alexander. This book has received numerous awards. I could have slides full of awards up here for it. This is a novel in verse format. So it's a narrative poem. And because of that, we have a chance to really dig deep with figurative language, writing alongside it, practicing poetry, and then of course, always reviewing those literature elements that they're going to be using throughout high school. As mentioned by Mrs. Phillips here, book clubs, that is something, it's not new, but it's something that we are going to be implementing this year kind of later on. Basically, it's a shared reading experience that students have in groups. So students have that choice of either like complete choice of their independent reading books, or sometimes it revolves around a theme. And what's great about this, it's student-led. So they're leading the discussions. Parlay, this is a great program. It's an online program and it focuses on student discussions. What's really fantastic about this is that students get to practice those 21st century skills, communication, critical thinking. And it's in a space where students' voices are heard, valued, and protected. One feature that I'm really looking forward to using this year, it's called the Written Roundtable. And basically a teacher will put up a question for the class. The students get to respond to it and their names are hidden. So they have a chance just to share their ideas without their names attached to it. Once students input their response, they get to read other students' answers and then respond to their classmates. And what's really great about this is teachers receive fantastic data. So this is an example from Parlay's website here. You can see that a teacher gets information about average comment length. We can also see the percentage of who responded, who received a response as well. This year, I imagine using this with novel discussions, debates, article discussions. Last year, a few high school teachers also used this in their classroom. And they spoke about how it really helps students coming out of that online learning experience to feel comfortable sharing their ideas.
Thank you, Ms. Reed. Yeah. A theme I think you'll see in our 712 especially is finding intrinsic joy. It's one of our values we're looking for when we're looking at novels. So the idea of finding this novel to pilot is, what are our students' values and what are they interested in reading? And then how does it match up with what we need to teach them? So you're going to see that a lot. When I looked at Parlay, I thought, wow, if you've been on an online class ever, and a lot of our students probably will at some point in their future education, it models a lot similarly to what Blackboard or other platforms that an online school would offer. So it's already practicing those skills. Lastly, we have Kyla Stelling, who teaches our ethnic studies at the high school.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Kyla Stelling. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm here to talk a little bit about the Ethnic Studies Department and also the course that we are running right now at the high school for freshmen. So today I'd really love to talk to you about, like, to what end do our learners engage with this discipline, which includes strands of social science, critical consciousness, decolonization, healing, and justice. So as we've been building the course and also the department, some foundational hallmarks of ethnic studies have come to be centering BIPOC voices, anti-racism, identity, inquiry and critical thinking, and civics and community. Much of this is derived from Rethinking Ethnic Studies by Wayne Au, and then also we have Christine Sleater's book as well. And these two texts really influence the current OSPI's framework for ethnic studies that they're developing with a committee. So specifically with centering BIPOC voices, this includes the histories, cultures, and excellence of Black, African American, Asian, Latinx, Chicanx, Latine, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, mixed race, and indigenous peoples of the US. Insofar as anti-racism, we study theories of race and racism, white supremacy, and forms of oppression. We also examine practices of liberation and racial justice. In identity, we learn about our own social identities or students' social identities and their intersectional proximities to power. So it has to do with kind of like personal identities as well as social identities, so what we experience out in the world. For inquiry, critical thinking, and civics, we really like to center inquiry-based learning. So asking questions, developing an awareness of bias and analysis of how one sees the world, which is what critical consciousness is. We consider our social responsibilities and envision as well as practice engagement and transformative changes, which is the civics component. And finally, community. In our classroom, we really want to center our community by focusing on empathy, humanism, collectivism, radical healing. And we really want to connect one another's cultural wealth and counter stories to develop that community. And it really does build upon the community element, really has a lot to do with like critical thinking and inquiry, identity, and like everything else in there as well. So what does this learning look like? There's all the theory behind it. There are all of the hallmarks. So centering the voices of marginalized communities with teacher as the facilitator of learning. So the teachers in this classroom are those who offer counter stories to the dominant narrative and share their own precious knowledge, which include people of color, LGBTQIA+ folks, marginalized peoples, and students themselves. The least present voice in this course should be me. As a white cishet woman, I can model my own racial consciousness, provide learning strategies to evoke inquiry and support language development, but I cannot represent or speak for communities of color. So we utilize documentaries, books, articles, and social media videos, and we're moving more towards off-island field trips to non-white institutions and organizations, as well as inviting in guest speakers who are part of non-white ethnic communities. Within the classroom, we practice a lot of culturally responsive and culturally disruptive pedagogy, both like as an instructor, and then students pick up that work as well. So the instruction, course content, and the learning environment are shaped by Zuraitis Hammond's framework for culturally responsive teaching, which includes cultural awareness, learning partnerships between teacher and student, information processing that draws upon multiple epistemologies and forms of learning artifacts, and developing a community of learners who have agency within a communal learning structure. So culturally disruptive learning is kind of like a newer way of thinking, like adding on to Zuraitis Hammond's culturally responsive, and that is to rupture our ways of being and knowing in order to make room for new understandings that allow the truth of others to take hold. Through culturally disruptive learning, students may have opportunities to disrupt whiteness by making it visible in more spaces, then interrogate and disrupt it so as to make room for those knowledges often left in the margins of schooling or not included at all. Our units are thematic units created in collaboration with students. So our units have been refined to be intersectional and nonlinear as recommended by the Ethnic Studies K-12 organizations in Washington State, including Washington's Ethnic Studies Now and the Cheeto Institute. And they actually come from both California and Arizona, who have their own ethnic studies programs. Approaching units in this way helps students make complex connections and synthesize understandings in multiple contexts. For example, like we won't have a Black/African-American unit and then an AA/NHPI unit and then a Latinx/Latina unit, but rather our units include the construction of race, white supremacy and racism, colonization and decolonization, critical thinking as social scientists, joy as an act of resistance, identity and intersectionality, as well as student requested units. So we've had student proposed mini units on hip hop, Black hair, Puerto Rican culture and history, immigration, equity in schooling, and systemic oppression in voting and in the criminal justice system. And the curriculum in this course shifts and changes based on the students who are in the classroom, so even period by period as well. Because there are funds of knowledge, their ethnicities, and their areas of growth and cultural responsiveness, critical consciousness, and social emotional development are really what are centered. Voice, choice, and power are a really big part of this course, or the courses that we have in our department. So students are provided opportunities to choose how they like to learn, what they'd like to learn, and how they'd like to show their learning with scaffolds from the instructor. And this is to create space for student voice and choice. Our learning is project-based, inquiry-based, and place-based. And there's a quote from, that's really around there, but it does come from one of my instructors, Dr. Phyllis Esposito. When we have voice, we have choice, and when we have choice, we have power. And that's what we hold present in those practices. Another element of our course and department is social emotional learning, since we are very focused on building community. And so given that we use our own lives and identities as text in the classroom, which is a very vulnerable practice for an adolescent, we intentionally spend time building our community throughout the semester. Students also learn how to advocate for supports that will help them transcend cognitive, social, or emotional barriers, which supports their growth as lifelong learners and their development of resiliency. We explicitly study vulnerability and naming our emotions, and we engage in restorative conversations as a class in response to moments of conflict. So some student and community outcomes of some feedback we've received, cultural impact, and then what we're working towards in the future as an ethnic studies department. I have some quotes from both students and families. One student said, "What I learned in ethnic studies, I learned through connection and community in the ethnic studies classroom. The space was created by the students for the students, a place of safety where students could be vulnerable and really open up and let their opinions out." And this came from last year's students in they do like video reflections and self-assessment and narrative evaluations. An anecdotal piece was, "When I stepped into the ethnic studies room, I could see my soul. And my son hasn't had much opportunity to explore his Blackness as a mixed race kid in mostly white schools and spaces. After watching the documentary on Black hair, he came home and was excited to explore what he could do with his hair." For our cultural impact, students presented their identity/intersectionality slam poems in the library to other classes and students, showcasing vulnerability and humanism, as well as their learning in regards to our identity and intersectionality unit. We're moving towards a collaborative and departing from an isolationist, individualistic schooling environment through project exhibitions open to all students and teachers from other classes. So the ethnic studies department has been working with like science and leadership, really trying to open up our classrooms and have those interdisciplinary opportunities for students to share their precious knowledge with one another. Additionally, students advocated for land acknowledgements to be included at South Whitby High School's assemblies and announcements, which we have implemented. And they also included the caveat that we need to do more in our school and district to invest in responsive and restorative relationships with our Indigenous community members. And so that's something that I actually have a student who's doing an independent study course around Pacific Northwest Indigenous histories and cultures, and they're trying to work towards an action project of bringing that into our district and creating some responsive and restorative relationships. Futurities. So what we're looking forward to, ethnic studies practice as intended. And what that means is an interdisciplinary framework applied in all classrooms. So math, English, science, electives, et cetera, also in K through 8 classrooms. That's a general framework and outline for ethnic studies. It's not just a standalone class. It's something that is distributed throughout all of our classrooms, and to have all teachers with that lens. Another futurity we're working towards is student expect classrooms and instructors to be culturally responsive and provide differentiated forms of learning. We have an advanced ethnic studies course for the first time next semester, which is really taking students from theory to praxis. So learning about all of these different theories and content areas and how can we actually apply those through civic engagement. We want to create responsive, reciprocal relationships with the Snohomish people and better serve our students who are Indigenous and Native. And again, that's our students' independent study project. And then also we're really trying to build student involvement in substantial equity work within the high school. So a student teacher equity council. And that's everything for me. Thank you.
I encourage them after they're done. And then if you have any questions for them to feel free to ask. And then I'm begging them to go home to give themselves rest so that they can be ready for their students tomorrow. So if you have any questions for any of them, I'll kind of pop around to be the microphone in their response.
First off, thanks for coming and presenting. I don't know who to ask this to, maybe a more general question, but when you're piloting either curriculum or a software product, how do you judge the success and whether it's rolled out on a permanent basis?
That's a good question. There's a lot of components depending on whether it's a curriculum or tech or what's the variable. Is it a supplemental or is it going to be our primary component? And that elementary versus secondary, there's going to be a lot of layers in the team. No two teams are going to have the same exact process or decision. We look at our values, we look at what we have that's been working, and we look at what our changes. We listen to student voice and we listen to what do we need, what are we looking for, and how are we going to better prepare our students for the next class or whatever we're preparing them for next. We use a program called Ed Reports. It's a public entity, and it evaluates a lot of curriculums in a lot of different areas, to the Common Core, to other components. We start with that. And then we look at regionally, what are our students in need of? Does it meet some cultural responsiveness? Do we need to supplement that? And then we use data to track it. And then we also use student. And then as we get further down into a pilot, we'll ask people to weigh in on it to see what is the impact had at home and what have you noticed in your students. So there's a lot of variables that are going to have influence on it. And the teams decide that and create rubrics to decide, is this worth the investment for us, for our students, and our community?
I just want to remark that it's fun to feel the continuity from what we were talking about with K through second grade reading all the way up through high school ethnic studies, thinking about the way our learners are being nurtured to tell their own stories and follow their own curiosities and engage with their peers in a learning community. And I see the continuity from the reading and writing curriculum that was discussed for those lower grades all the way up through the high school. So thanks for bringing those threads of connection and nurturing individual spark all the way through.
I actually find that particularly interesting and important because they are different curriculums put out by different companies, and yet you found those vertical columns to align them. So thank you. Yeah.
Personally, I really enjoyed hearing about how lessons and curriculum are student-centered and kind of like having students take the direction and bring their creativity into the work and then kind of leading that in their education. So I really appreciated that throughout the different curriculum presentations.
I wanted to note that I love the idea of creating joy in readers, that finding that one thing that really spoke to them, because that was so important for me. I didn't read well until second grade. And then I found a series of books that spoke to me and that sparked it. And now I read too much.
No such thing.
My sleep schedule begs to differ. So I love that focus on inspiring joy. And I love that I see that not just in ELA, not just in social studies, but across the board from our teachers and our staff here, of finding that thing that sparks joy. So I love seeing that. I love the way that ethnic studies is entwining identity, community, critical thinking, civics, and anti-racism, because to be a community, you have to have all of those other things. And I love the way it's explicitly called out as all of those things being part of it. And as Audrey was saying, pulling student voice and experience forward to build that community. I love that. The idea of culturally disruptive is, it's speaking to me because in college, one of the most disruptive things that I had said to me was, in a 200 level history course, there is no such thing as fact in history. And yes, that might be a little hyperbolic, but a little bit of hyperbole there, but it still sets up that disruptive narrative of question what you're seeing, think critically about it. And I love that it's starting here as freshmen in South Whitby. I'm curious if piloting this new curriculum, if what in particular is standing out as really good to you from this new curriculum compared to the previous ones? If you have anything off the top of your head. For those online.
Do you want to speak to this? I wasn't here long enough to speak to previous curriculums, except for kindergarten during a COVID year. And I don't think that's probably a good gauge of what it was supposed to be. You want to share?
question.
I was just asking if what particular things about this new curriculum are standing out as good to you compared
Oh,
to the
yeah. I
previous
can
ones?
say that.
Yeah.
I just couldn't compare.
Mentor text for sure. Yeah, go ahead.
So for me, it is this exactly what they're saying, choice, right? And engagement, and being able to look at who's in front of you and have the freedom to provide them choice. And even though it's still structured, and that choice is causing them to be engaged, whether it's through the reading activities or the writing activities. And that brings me joy because they're excited about what they're doing.
I also really like and I said mentor text because there's always an example of what we're teaching that they can look back to, that our vocabulary is connected to, that they can relate to, and it's all beautifully written text. So it's very rich. I really appreciate that about this as well.
So Collaborative Classroom has published their own little small readers for like the small group reading up to a certain level. And then after that, they coordinated with publishers of really great text. So the small group texts are not just the, Jan ran past they're great literature that we have access to both through the mentor text and in our small group reading.
Right, and for the beginning sets, that's all online too. So we can print it because Collaborative Classroom wrote it. We can print it and send it home if we had to, as well as the kids can have it up on their Chromebooks and they can be reading it and sharing. A lot of tech that goes along with the curriculum that I appreciate because we can always seem to get our questions answered. QRL codes can pop things right out of the books. And so that makes it really nice too. If we have a question on how something should look when we're teaching it, we can watch the videos as well.
Awesome. Thank you. And my daughter is doing wonderfully in this curriculum. So I can't say enough about, I've been able to see so much growth in her. So that's really wonderful for me to see there.
I have a question for our student reps. I understand that the ethnic studies program was created fairly recently, in part due to student voice and the demand from the students. I'm curious if you have any feedback from students about how it's been received and if, as implemented, it sort of met the vision of what students were looking for.
So unfortunately, we weren't able to take ethnic studies as it was implemented last year, I believe was the first year, and it's a freshman class. But from what I've heard in the feedback, and I have a sibling that's currently taking the class, they're really enjoying it and they really love how open the curriculum is.
One thing I have to add is I think it's really empowering to be able to sit in a class that was brought to this district by students, and it feels empowering, kind of like, you have a strong part in your education. And overall, I've heard really great things about the class. I know students who are going back into it for advanced ethnic studies. So I've heard really great things.
I just note that both that and environmental sciences were almost wholly driven by students. The administration and staff jumped on board quite happily and eagerly, but that drive came from the students. Just to give them their full props there.
Thank you.
Mr. Patton.
Just a real quick way, I have Kyla here. I have to brag on her. It's really truly amazing. Really, the state of Washington, this is pretty much a brand new graduation requirement. And the state, believe it or not, was a little slow in developing their curriculum to recommend. And we really didn't get it until late October. But again, Kyla was already ready. And just the transformation of something else, I want you to know that she's not just a teacher of ethnic studies at South Libby High School. I see her as a great advisor for me. She's a go-to. She gives great input and recommendations for our staff, our SEL work, our equity work. She works with students. Again, I just want to say thank you. And I think we need to realize how lucky we are to have her here in our district. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for presenting. As was said earlier, we really appreciate it. One thing I neglected to note at the beginning of this is the first in a series. We're going to be looking at all of the departments to some degree at South Woodby over the next several months, because the board needs to know what's going on. And we get into the classrooms as often as possible, but hearing it and sharing it with the community, those in person, those on Zoom, those watching the recording afterward, I think is also really important, because there is a desire for the community to know what's going on in schools. And this is a safe, but also informative way to provide that for the community. So I really appreciate you all for joining us. I know we're still a little short on prep time on this. The intention is to have students here, and I'm sure we will in future, but I think it's fantastic. Thank you all for coming and presenting to us. And please get some sleep and rest. We'll move on from there to, and also thank you to Ms. Phillips for arranging that and organizing it and leading the curriculum work. We'll now move on to public comments. We have 16 folks. We have had up to 16 folks in our Zoom room. We have several here. If you would like to make a comment, if you're in the Zoom meeting and would like to make a comment, please use the Q&A function to enter your name and location right now. Enter that so that we know that you want to say something, and then you can take your time typing it up. Mrs. McCarr, do we have anyone signed up in person? Please.
Can't hear me?
Well, it's for the
Go
folks
over it
online.
again.
It's the folks online. Yeah, can we actually start that over real quick? Just to make sure. that
Just
those are-
wondering if you have anything like a hail and farewell party or group for the comers and the goers. It may be difficult for the people who are leaving, but in terms of community understanding of what's going on in the school district, it seems like it would be a very useful event for the public to be able to meet with the school board, the teachers, especially the new teachers, and those that are leaving, so we can, if we know that they're leaving, the communication between the school district as an entity and the general public, it seems like a thing like a hail and farewell party or two parties might be useful. The question I have relating to the presentation was, I have grandchildren that will be in school here, and I'm part of teaching them to use cursive writing as well as printing. And it's my understanding through grandchildren that have left the schooling here that they were not taught cursive. Is there a school policy regarding cursive writing, teaching it? And if not, is a student, the right word, but are they discouraged from learning cursive writing? The motive there is that there is so much that I have learned by reading journals from my ancestors when they crossed the country, that kind of thing, that were in cursive. And we have public documents that are frequently in cursive. So I don't know the answer to my question, but I certainly hope that cursive writing is taught and encouraged and not penalized. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that suggestion and opinion.
Carruthers, 6740 Viewmont, Clinton. That was a very interesting presentation. I wonder what the process would be if a member of the public wanted to view a class, wanted to sit in on a class of these natures, of this nature. What's the process? Is there a process?
just want to remind, this is a public comment. I can talk to you about that after, or we could talk to you about that afterwards, but we're not.
Board
gonna-
has policy
Yeah.
on that you can review on visitors.
It'll be online?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for sharing the curiosity. I have one from Lori Johnson in Langley. As a parent and former South Will student, I am so proud, excited, full of joy, seeing and hearing this curriculum implementation. We really are blessed to have such a skilled staff. Thank you, Lori, for sharing. If there are any, I don't see that there are any other folks in person signed up. Mrs. Macaro? Nope. Anyone else who is online, I'll give you 30 seconds or so to just type in your name and location, just to let us know you're working on something. Otherwise, we will move on from public comment. All right, dead air being the longest possible time in the world. We'll leave it at that because I don't see anything else coming in. We'll move on to our new business. We only have one item of new business tonight, and that is the thing we have been discussing for the past 2 months. Memorandum 2223-01, approval of the 5th and 6th grade building reconfiguration effective 2023-2024 school year. Great. Discussion.
I'd like to mention real quick that Audrey and I had an opportunity to get student feedback from high school students, and some of the comments that stood out for us were people commented on how too crowded they make the school already feels, and how there's too many people already in the school from a student perspective, and also that they think it's going to ruin the 6th grade's culture and the high school experience because there's no more separation of the two schools. And the last comment that we received is the school needs to be a comfortable place for people to learn without it being too crowded. So we had multiple students discussing the crowded issue and how even from the numbers, if it doesn't feel crowded, it feels crowded from a student perspective.
Another concern I've heard over the past month is the difference in age being on the same campus. And I think there's kind of a worry for crossover that we kind of already experienced sometimes in the hallway. I think there's just a concern that if the 6th graders get moved to the high school, that will be emphasized even more. And then also kind of losing that middle school feeling that you get at the 5-6 campus.
Thank you. Dr. Moshe, I know that you talked to the leadership class. If you wanted to also share your experiences there, because we do want to get as much student feedback as possible. And I know you had an opportunity to get some directly yourself. Thank you both for sharing what you've brought in also.
I did have the opportunity to circle up with our leadership students, and there were probably 25 students. They expressed concerns about, well, I'll focus strictly on the consolidation. They shared similar concerns. It feels crowded in the locker room. And what about identity? What about culture? What about the age difference? And so nothing really different from what the students reported. I did get the opportunity, though, to share with them the actual information around, for example, I think our locker room issue is one of scheduling. I come to understand that, for example, the athletic locker room isn't necessarily used. And so all the students are in one particular locker room. Students were unaware that the building was actually built for almost 800 students, and we probably have about, with this change, would have about 550. What I did hear very clearly, and our two student reps have also said, is the sense of belonging How can we make it a 6-8 experience? How can we separate that from the high school? Can we really do that? How can we make sure there's not bathroom crossover, that there's not, you know, 6th graders crossing paths with high school seniors and so on. So I think if the board chooses to do this, those are things that we need to really be cognizant of and make sure that we're focused on. But again, they've portrayed the student sentiment that I heard as well. So thank you.
I'd like to just add a few. It relates actually very closely to this question of crowding, but bigger picture, we've talked a lot about what's possible with the bond. And I also just hope that the administration and staff will think about what we do if the bond doesn't go as hoped. I'll speak for myself. I don't want to get so caught up in a vision of a school building that has a lot of potential for financial investment and then be unable to meet that need without the bonds. So I suppose what I would hope is that questions like the acoustics, the traffic flow, the safety of students, the cultural delineation between middle and high school could be addressed in a some sort of rudimentary budget that would be able to go forward even without a bond, especially in that first year where we wouldn't even be in that bond stage yet. And given that I know that there's going to be potentially about $300,000 extra in the budget if we do make this change, I would imagine that some of that could be redirected towards some of these material improvements to the spaces.
To the last point, I believe that, well, since we've got specific funds for capital improvements and such, that would be limited to that, but there would certainly ease up some areas.
You can't go the other way. You can use general fund to do improvements. You can't use capital funds to do general fund work.
Thank you. I wasn't sure on that.
So if I may, to Marnie's point, we have obviously been working on the what if the board chooses to go in this direction. There are things that we would do for next year, and it's immaterial whether there's a bond or not. There are certainly things that we would love to do that would be even more effective for segregating the spaces. But there are simple things that we can do that can create a sense of belonging, like calling what is no longer new, the new commons, calling it the middle school commons. Doing simple things like that, creating a real entrance that has a permanent sign, not a banner. Once we figure out the where, then creating the actual culture and system for it. But that is the work that would start effective tomorrow if you make this decision tonight. If you don't make this decision for us to go forward, then we do other things. I think this, you know, I'm as superintendent, I came to you with this recommendation and you've studied it. And so I continue after having heard from the students, and I respect their input, after working with the admin team, after not hearing from our community or our staff, having given multiple opportunities, I highly recommend that the board consider doing this. I stand firm in that recommendation, but it's the board's decision.
I would also just add to that we do appreciate and respect student voice. We also have to look at what is the larger picture on the horizon. And so looking at if we continue to pour $300,000 plus into a building that is not at capacity and is shrinking in the numbers, what is the impact that that has on staffing? What is the impact that that has on materials? And when you are looking at situations where we may want to consider, we'll have contracts coming up where we need to look at what do salaries and raises look like. If we hold on to this building, that impacts that decision-making at that time. And so, yes, student voice is very important in this, and I don't want to discount where people's feelings are in that place. But I also think there is a longer term plan of if we are making decisions that allocate financial resources into buildings, then that potentially means fewer curriculum adoptions. It means fewer class choices. It can mean fewer teachers on your campuses, so fewer scheduling opportunities. Those are the lasting impacts that we have to think about. And it doesn't mean that we couldn't revisit the conversation at a later point. But looking at, it's a larger picture, and we are here for the students, and we have always been a student first board, but we have more responsibility than just students in this instance.
Well, I'm looking, thank you, Andrea. I'm looking at our mission up here, and part of that mission is resilience and innovation. And so I appreciate the student voice that we're hearing from all grades. I've appreciated parents and caregivers and families who've reached out and community members who've reached out, because it gives us a place to start. We know where people are and where their hearts are and where their thoughts are. And that gives us a lot of room to start speaking to and thinking around not just the physical capabilities of a building, but the resilience and innovative nature of our community and our schools. So that brings me a lot of joy, even though I also can see that, loss of programs, loss of buildings, those transitions can be really, really challenging. And so I appreciate all those words and all those voices. And, but as I look at kind of who we are as a district and where we're headed with our board goals, with our superintendent's goals, and with our vision and mission, we're always working toward aligning in ways that feel really powerful. So thank you for all of your words.
I think it's important to kind of think that is this amount of money we're saving from making this possible transition, is it adequate to cover the loss of culture and identity students are losing from making this transition? And how do we know that this money that we would, considering if we make this transition, the money we save, how do we know it's going back to students and making up for the kind of the loss and identity that they would lose from this transition?
We as a board set the budgetary priorities. So when we are looking at that, we have conversations around what's going into curriculum, what's going into building improvement. So this is the board that approves that budget. And I think when I'm not wearing a school board hat, right, I oversee a budget that supports a large number of programs that have also seen decreasing enrollment. When we look at Dan's presentation and we look at how much of our budget goes to salaries, we are overspending on that side. We are out of the range where we should be in terms of that piece. What that means is that there is fewer and fewer places to cut that don't directly impact students. By closing down a building, what Dan would actually be able to do is open up more opportunities for us to maintain direct services to students. If we keep that building, we have to allocate the resources to maintaining it. It's not just heat, it's not just water, but it's also repairs to the building, whatever can happen to it. Not to mention, there's a personnel cost with having people be at multiple locations. If we eliminate that piece of it, students actually end up with more resources. And that's ongoing, right? The part that we have to consider is that as enrollment declines, the district is getting less and less apportionment coming in, which means that as that number of apportionment comes in, that means we have to scale back. So the question is, what do we want to prioritize? Do we want to prioritize what we have heard students say that they want, which is new curriculum, different courses, more options, opportunities to go do field trips and go have experiences? Or do we want to prioritize a building? And I think culture and community can be created wherever you are in whatever capacity that group wants it to happen. It doesn't have to be in a specific building. And so I would challenge and lean into what Anne was saying about being innovative in how we think about what does that process look like. If we pass a bond, right, maybe the building completely shifts and it looks different, and maybe it looks, not for comparison, because I know that we compare too much to them, but like Coopville's building where it is very separate, right? Maybe it shifts and it looks that way so that there is a feeling of separation and a feeling of two different schools in one building. But there's also $300,000 that we could pour into changes if that bond doesn't pass. And that would be a one-time piece, right? But then you also have that saving moving forward going on and continuing to pass on. But the priorities of that budget is set by the board. And I don't think that there is anybody in this room and at this table with that decision-making power who don't want to see the students having more opportunity and having more choice and having more experiences or preserving a sense of culture.
I do want to note that the proposal is not closing a building, it's reallocating students to different buildings. Just for formal notes. Since it's something we will be voting on, I just want to be very clear in the memorandum.
And I just want to reiterate that we hear the student concern about needing a middle school experience. And so we have different options to allow students to truly be segregated differently than they are now. So I know that there's a concern around that. So I would, if the board chooses to do this reconfiguration, I would expect that students will be engaged in how to make that school, both schools feel like they deserve to feel, a high school and a middle school. And I do believe that that we can get there.
I just want to thank our student reps for consistently voicing these concerns and bringing back what they're hearing for students, and also from the community members who've come over this past month and a half to voice either concerns or questions or just anything to help clarify my thinking around whether or not to do this. And I think if we go forward with this, there are legitimate concerns, and I think that the next step will be addressing those and making sure that the folks who have voiced concerns, whether they're parents or students, just know that their concerns are understood, and the board didn't move forward with this ignoring their concerns. We would be moving forward with this with their concerns in mind, and with the ability to address them as part of the plan.
And just to clarify, we certainly did have community members come forward in meetings and express their concerns. I don't want to be misunderstood in thinking that we didn't hear any. We certainly did. But for the last several weeks, I've made myself available at open houses, at various athletic events. I've asked for any email of concerns and so on. And it's been very, very few concerns that have come forward. And the board is aware of all that we have heard, including the student voice. So I do think we've given ample opportunity to all those who may have had concerns to express, including staff, with personal email to every single staff member, with a personal email to all 4th through 8th grade parents, with the invitation for community to come out at various times. So I do think that if we had any comment, that they did come forward.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're saying the same thing.
Yeah, we had 13 community members or family members at the community forum. I've had, I don't know about the rest of you, but I've had a dozen or 20 informal conversations just standing out at parent pickup or at the theater or whatever to get the input from people. But you're right, Dr.
Yeah.
Marshall, we haven't gotten emails. We
We
haven't
haven't
gotten.
had any frantic complaints or anything like that. We've had very few people say, really much, but I've had some questions. And then when people ask their questions, I answer them. They say, oh, that makes sense. So it's that kind of response.
Well, and the concerns that have been brought up to me, both in the forum and in person, all relate to exactly what the students were saying. And what you were saying about your meeting with the leadership is concern about, the majority was concern about sixth graders on the same campus as high schoolers. I mean, that's been the main, almost the only complaint I've heard. It's not the only, it's been almost the only. I really do want to echo Joe's thanks to you for bringing forward the concerns of the high schoolers, because that is something that, I'm going to be quite frank, had slipped my thought process. I had been so focused on what's this going to do for the 5th and 6th graders that I had forgotten that there was effects rippling out up in particular. I'd been thinking about what's it going to do for the 5th grade, the K4s for the 5th graders to come down, and for the 7, 8s, but I hadn't been thinking as much about what it meant for the high schoolers. And I really do appreciate that, the importance of that sense of an identity. I do think that actually one of the benefits of this for the middle schoolers is a single middle school identity, not South Campus and the 7, 8, but a 6, 8 middle school campus on the middle high school building. And I think that that's one really, really beneficial thing, because middle school is sort of where you start laying the foundation, more than the foundation, framing. I'm going to go back to construction. I did a bunch of construction summers. It's the framing for who you're going to be as an adult. K5, the elementary, that's the foundation. Middle school, that's the framing. That's the studs. That's the sheathing. That's the thing that holds everything up. And having that connection, that identity in those years. Now, this may be me overemphasizing it because those were bad years for me. Those were bad years for me. But that seems so critical to me. But we don't want it to come at the expense of other students. And so I hear absolutely what you're saying. I do see additional benefits besides the financial to this. And I think that those are really important, because a lot of the complaints that, some of the other complaints that I've heard have been, you're just looking at the dollars and cents. And I was, in preparing for this, I was looking at some of the other benefits, is bringing 6th graders to athletics. The athletic teams that you're on are just so critical and important to the development. Athletic teams, clubs, activities are so important to that age group from, well, all the way from K through 12, but particularly 6 through 12. And so giving them that early opportunity, high school would have been much, much harder for me without the cross-country team. And finding that in middle school was really helpful for me. Allowing mentorship up and down, having 5th graders as examples here on the current K4 campus, I think would be really valuable. Not that the 4th grade Orca leaders and peer mentors, mediators, yes, aren't doing a fantastic job now, but giving them that opportunity to be top of the heap in that critical developmental stage of 5th grade, I think is so really valuable too. Letting them help teach the younger students to build that practice for later, but also allowing our high schoolers to interact in controlled environments as TAs and advisors for clubs and that sort of thing. If all of our middle schoolers are on one campus, I think is incredibly valuable. Less need for the outdoor oversight that's necessary, that Dr. Fankhauser has put together so wonderfully to make sure our students are safe at that South Campus, but it's less oversight that's necessary if they're on a single campus that's focused on an interior space. Like I said, collecting those middle schoolers so tightly, I do see that there are concerns with losing high school identity if there are more middle schoolers on that campus. I absolutely see that. And I think that if we vote this in, that's something that that I, as one of 5 board members, would be strongly urging the administration, and I know that they won't need this urging, to get high school student involvement in trying to come up with solutions to. Dr. Moshe said, turning the new commons into the middle school commons, and as a Falcon who was there when the new commons was put in, my heart clenched a little, I have to admit, because that is losing some identity. And I don't know what the solution is to that besides some of the resiliency that Anne was talking about. If we decide that the benefits, that financial and otherwise, that we see are worth the effort put in to make sure that we can build those individual identities and make sure that some of the scheduling with locker rooms gets shifted around so it doesn't feel quite so crowded. Some of the scheduling in shared spaces like art rooms and science rooms doesn't feel so crowded. Yeah, just things that I was thinking about as I was pondering tonight and thinking about what's so important about this vote.
So Director Williford, in just a response, I think that I'm going to call in on one of our group norms, which is that we are holding ourselves to our lane. And I recognize this is more than just a financial decision, but our role as a board is to make financial decisions. And it is to let Joe and the team that she has use their expertise and their knowledge and their education around pedagogy and theory and child development, and to determine and to make those other decisions. And I recognize, like, you're summarizing what we were hearing, but I also want to just be really clear that how that rolls out is not a decision for us. And we can have our thoughts and our opinions, but we really and I'm saying that because I feel like there's leaning into that lane right now, and I'm calling on our norm to just challenge ourselves to stay elevated to that, right? This is not necessarily about our own experience or what we are seeing in that situation, but it is looking at what is the role we were elected to do, what are the resources we have been charged to manage, and what is the direction we want to set for Dr. Moshe moving forward. And I just want to call us back to that.
No, I recognize that the school board's job is not the how, it's the what. But I did feel that it was very important to look at the other things that are weighing beyond the financial, because there are many other concerns involved here between identity and community and all of these benefits that I laid out and the financial ones that you did.
And I also just want to add that I feel like Dr. Moshe and her team have done a really good job capturing that in leading up to this. And I do feel like it's been represented.
Oh, yes. Most of these were not my thoughts. Most of these are culled from either community discussions or Dr. Moshe's presentations. I just wanted to summarize it. And I do want to make it clear that this is a summarization, not my thoughts.
And that's why I'm calling us back to our board norms.
Yep. Are there any other thoughts or comments from anyone on the board? Okay, since this is such an important decision, we're going to go through with a roll call vote on this, which means first we'll get advisory votes from our student members, and then we'll go in reverse order of seniority, except the chair goes last because theoretically that chair's vote could influence. My vote's not going to influence Andrea, but that's the tradition. Yes. So roll call vote. I will go first to our student representatives. Katya, what is your advisory vote?
Nay.
Audrey, what is your advisory vote?
Nay.
Now we'll move on to our board votes. Joe, your vote.
Yes.
Okay, Marnie, your vote.
Yes.
Anne, your vote.
Aye.
Andrea, your vote.
Aye.
I vote aye as well. In that case, memorandum 2223-01, approval of the 5th and 6th grade building reconfiguration effective 2023-2024 school year has been approved. We will move on to reports, starting with our financial and enrollment report. Mr. Pullman.
Good evening. We'll start with enrollment. This is the first enrollment of our 22-23 school year. And again, it's 1 out of 10 months. So it's not where we are for the year, but it does start the process and starts the conversation about what does enrollment look like. So if we look at it in the general ed, and I'll refer to that as our basic education building programs, we're about 1,072, and talk about breakdown in a minute. The ALE, a little over 73 FTE in there. Special education is about 166 head counts. Our vocational program, which I can't see, is a little over 70, and our bilingual program has 4 students in that. This is just a quick look at the last 3 years and then where we are in September. So it's a snapshot of the same month in each of those years, and you can kind of see where each of the entities, the K-4 building, the 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12, high school SWA program and the ALE program has been in numbers, with the big change in the ALE program going from basically a small handful of students to almost 73 in September of this year. It also has a comparison to budget. You can see that at the K-4 level, we're up about 24.5 from what we had budgeted, 5, 6, up a lower 5, and the others are about where we thought we would be. Just a graph on the, what does it look like for people like pictures? So quickly, the orange is where we are in September and the blue is our budget. So you can see that, the K-4 is up. The 9-12 looks up, but if we look at the 9-12 SWA, it's basically a wash in there, but gives you an idea. Also want to start looking at where do we think we're going? And I do this by looking at where we've been. So I look at the previous years and I can create a % change from 1 month to the next. So did enrollment go up or down in 17-18 from September to October? Was the change from October to November, et cetera? And by doing that, I can then use those percentages on, and this one is for averages, a 1 year, 3 year, and 5 year average to see where do we think enrollment might be. May or may not be accurate, but if we use last year's experience, which is an anomaly, I'll show you that in a minute, we would think that we'd end up at 1166 from our current number of 1145. If we look at our typical 3 and 5 year projections, we'd actually drop to about 1135, 1136, which is what I'm more comfortable looking at because that's typically what we've seen. So you can see what those projections look like. You can see that the budget is the blue line, which is the 5 year average, very typical pattern over time that we've seen. We started in September, we go up a little bit in October, and then we continue to decline throughout the remainder of the year, which a little bit of increase in the latter 2 months of the year. And you can see that using the 3 and 5 year projections, it does that. Last year is the top line, quite a different pattern. A lot of that was we added the ALE program. There's some variations in there. And then I looked at it by individual years rather than using 5 year averages, 3 year averages. This is the exact pattern that we've seen in 17, 18, 18, 19, et cetera. And you can see that, 3 of those patterns come out in that 1135 to 1140 range if it's a typical year. And the outliers are last year and then the first year of COVID. That's the other bottom line and the top line. So, I would feel more comfortable saying that we're probably going to follow one of those other patterns rather than what we followed last year. We had 2 significant increases in enrollment. One was in October and the other was in February last year, a pattern I've never seen in the last 20 years. So it's quite different than what we've seen in the past. If you have questions, feel free to stop me. So comparing by grade levels and by ALE and basic education, you can see that there's where the differences are. Kindergarten up about 10 students from where we had budgeted. Part of that is due to students that are a year older than normal coming into the program this year, who probably was withheld last year because of COVID. First grade, there's about 11 kids difference, 12 kids between the basic education program and the ALE. Everybody else is fairly in line with what we thought we were going to be. And when I looked at those first grade transfers, I can look at who transfers in and who transfers out and where they came from and where they went to. And what I found was there's 14 students that transferred in. And you see where they're listed. They came from Waldorf, Wellington, Oak Harbor, homeschool, a lot of local kids that were here. One out of state, one from Seattle, one from Mukilteo. And they basically split pretty evenly between the North Campus Basic Education Program and the ALE program. We had 2 kids transfer out. One from the North Campus went to Oak Harbor, and the second one went to Waldorf. So 14 in, 2 out, that's about the 11.6 variance that we see in that first grade. So we kind of understand where those kids came from. And the fact that the majority of them weren't new to the island. They were kids that were here and had chosen something else in the previous year. I also looked at the survey, the American Community Survey for 2022, and I was interested in how many kids they said they thought we had by age group, and then how many kids we have in those grade levels. So if I looked at the 5 to 9 year olds, there's 5 grade levels there. Their estimate in 2020 was 561 kids. That breaks down to about 112 kids per grade. We're at about 78.5. So that's about a 70% capture rate of those kids. We look at the 10 to 14 year olds, 631, about 126 per grade. We're at 93, about 74%. And you see the high school age at about 96%. Of course, these are grade groups. They're 5-year groups. I don't have the breakdown by year, so I can't say that exactly. But what I wanted to look at is, okay, under 5, what do we have? And according to this survey, there's 440 students in that 5-year span, which would be about 88 students per grade. We captured 70% of those, 62 kids. So just trying to think about what are we going to see in the future based on these. And again, this is an estimate, big margin of error either way. If you look at the plus or minus, they're quite large. But the fact that we have a correlation, I think is pretty similar to what the estimate is as far as the number of kids that we are getting, gives us a little bit of feedback. Again, we won't get the 2020 census broken down by for 1, 2, 3, 4 age groups until probably the spring, because it's really late getting it out. And that would give us more detail, but it's just starting to look at, when we plan for the future, which I'm already doing, what are we anticipating? If there's no questions on that, I will go into the financials.
I just want to say how much I appreciate all of those tables and different ways of looking at it. The data nerd in me is just squealing with glee over here. You can't see it because of the mask, but I'm almost bouncing in my chair.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, but it's important in my role to try to analyze this to get what we believe might be answers as far as where do we project, and that we have to project out 4 years for OSPI in the future. And you need some type of data point.
Absolutely.
How accurate it is, I can't guarantee, but at least it's a way of looking at things.
And that was the other thing I wanted to address, comment on is the 2020 census. From what I have heard, is not our most accurate census. But there's no other source of information on that, correct?
Correct. There is nothing else that we can see that shows anything about the demographics of the South Woodby School District environment.
Yeah.
You can get other demographics that are larger, but we really need what's within our boundary.
Yep.
Otherwise, it doesn't work well. Okay, so we'll start with the financial report. This is for August 31st. So this is our last fiscal month of the 21-22 school year. You can see that we timeline, we're at 100%. Revenue, we're a little over 100%, and expenditures at about 97.6%. Again, not our last financial report. There's some adjustments that are made. But even though we are still below budget, we are still spending more than we have in revenue. Because of that, and we've talked about before, that $644,000 that came in that we're going to spend next year, it kind of skewed that picture. The revenue should have been 21 million versus 21.8. But anyways, so that's where we are. And then I'll break down the revenue by month. And again, you can see that, you know, it was higher with that payment. And then just an expenditure breakdown, and very similar pattern, but again, higher than previous years. And we would expect that that continues because 87% of our costs are salary and benefits, and that continues to escalate as long as we maintain the same number of employees. And this is just a quick breakdown. You can see that of the salary and benefits, it's 86.79%. It's a bulk of our salary costs. The MSOCs, which are the non-employee costs, about 13.2%. And then a little breakdown over the last 3 years of what that looks like. Remembering that, you know, last year was a very abnormal year in spending. So I try to go back to 18-19, which is a more precise spending pattern. So MSOCs ended up at about 87.5%. There's a few encumbrances in there, not very many. It's $87,000. Some of those will clear out. There's a few bills we paid after this. Payroll, actually a little bit over what we had planned, but we knew that because we added staff throughout the year based on the needs. And the total expenditure is about 98%. So we stayed within budget from where we thought we were going to be. Again, just the fund balance, so you can see how it has changed over the year. Normally, you would see fund balance rising at the end of a school year, but this year, because of that jump in May, it artificially inflated it. So there is not a rise. Normally, we would see that May would be below that orange line and then build back up a little bit. So just a very similar pattern that we see from year to year. Budget status report. We basically have a little over $5 million in fund balance. And again, as we budgeted, we will spend some of that next year and then the following year. Balance sheet, just looking at the same thing, $5 million in general fund, capital projects at about 2.1 million, debt service fund, $920, about 83,000 in ASB. It's a big debt service fund. Well, we have no bonds. And since we have no bond debt, we have no income coming into debt service. It's just the
Dan,
transfer.
that number just always cracks me up on the screen. It's like
I know.
$5,2,920, 82,000. Like
We have no debt. Yeah, the mortgage is paid so far. Private purpose trust at a little over 789,000, and transportation vehicle fund, you'll see that it actually went up by about $150,000. We had that payment in August, and so we'll start looking at when we think we can afford a bus based on that. The other funds, we just briefly talked about the balances in each one of those. So unless you have a question, I won't go through that again. Do want to update you a little bit about our financial statements. August is the end of our fiscal year, but not our financial statements. Our financial statements actually extend 2 months past that time because there's accruals, accounts receivables, all those things. So our financial statements through OSPI is called the F-196. So it is the financial statement that I'm working on now. Very intensive, a lot of work. By October 25th, it's due to ESD. They review it through their financial department. Then it goes to OSPI, whose financial department reviews it again. And then we send the information to the state auditors. And it basically works that it's a download of our data, and it gives them time to review it before the audit. And for those that are unaware, we are required by the state of Washington to have an annual audit. And it's the Office of the Washington State Auditor that does that. And you'll see that their mission is to provide citizens with independent and transparent examinations of how their state governments use funds and develop ways to make them more efficient and effective. So during this process of building the F-196, I'm reviewing for accuracy, compliance with state and federal laws, regulations. I do maintenance of effort, compliance checks, federal cross-cutting, federal excess costs, recovery, and carryover schedule of federal assistance, which is our federal grants, to make sure we use them appropriately, they're coded appropriately, the appropriate fund balance accounting, state pension reporting, all those type things, so that by the time the state auditors get it, I'm confident that everything's accurate and where it should be. And then the auditors come in the spring, and it's sometime after January through March usually. It's a very labor intensive 6 to 10 weeks where they are here every day going through everything that we have. But the audit itself covers 3 main components. And the first is an accountability audit, and that evaluates whether a school district has adhered to the applicable state laws, regulations, and its own policies and procedures. And the reason that they do this is to ensure the public that, the district has accounted for and has controls for all the financial funds that we have, that we have used them appropriately, and that we are protecting the public resources from misappropriation and use. So they come in and make sure that, all laws are being followed. The second is the actual financial statement audit themselves. And they go through and they test a lot of the different financial areas of whether we use funds appropriately, it was accounted for appropriately, do we have controls in place, does it meet state laws, does it meet our own policies and procedures, basically did we do everything correctly, and that's so that they can say with confidence that it's a reliable picture of this is what the district funds looks like. And the last is the federal single audit. We're required to have that if we receive more than $750,000. And this year's CFA is going to be like $2.4 million because of all the federal influx of funds. And it's looking at, all the federal requirements that go with it. And there's 2 components. The first is, do we have internal controls in place so we are protecting those funds? And did we use them appropriately? And then the second part is just a financial thing of, does it work the way it's supposed to, and did we spend it the way we're supposed to? And for those that are interested, all our state audits and our F-196 financial reports are on our website. They go back probably 10 years. I've been trying to keep them on there, so if anybody ever wanted to look at them, they could look at those. So if they had any questions about, what does the auditors think about the district, accounting, it's there. So that's one of the big things that I'm working on for the next 4 weeks, basically, to get that off to the ESD, OSBI, and then start downloading to the state auditors so they can start doing their review and evaluation so they know what they want to look at, if they can identify areas of concern that they need to look at or whatever it is when they come in, when they do their audit. So just wanted to update you on that aspect of it, because it is a big piece of what I do this time of the year. And then I will bring it back probably in November to give you the final unaudited version that says, here's what it is. And the actual document is hundreds of pages, but you can just read the cover page basically if you want.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I see all the administrators back there clapping because he does it so they don't have to. Okay.
Yeah, thanks again, as always, for not only doing all this work behind the scenes to keep our budget going, but also coming and presenting it in such a coherent way so that folks like us can understand it.
Okay, we'll move on to the student board members report.
Thank you. Okay. I'm going to talk about the high school and the 7th, 8th, and then Audrey's going to discuss the 2 south and north campuses. So in the high school, sports are in full swing. There's been tons of fun games, and the student section this year has been just incredible. There's so many kids showing up to every sporting event. It's been really fun. I don't believe there's a home football game this Friday, but those ones are always fun when they do occur. And ASB has been planning a lot of fun things. Today we had an election for a student council from the regular advisory classes, so even more student voice can be heard in ASB. Planning homecoming is coming up, so having dances is kind of back to normal because we've kind of halted things for a little bit. And last year, I know it was somewhat normal, but still quite strange. We had our parent night last Wednesday, so parents could come to the school, and that was for both high school and middle school. They had 2 different times, but parents could come and meet the teachers and learn about the class curriculum. And I know middle school ASB is up and running, and middle school sports. I know the football team had their first football game today, and I know some of those players. But I know they were very excited for that, very excited. And then we had a club fair 2 Wednesdays ago, I think now, during lunch, which was just a fun opportunity for everyone to see the different clubs on campus and see the different opportunities available.
Yeah, what I'd say, adding to the high school, there's just been like an immense amount of school spirit, which is really great. Whether it be, involvement in sports games or just like coming forward with concerns, say even about the possible facility transition. There's just been a lot of, I would say, student involvement. And then at the North Campus, they had curriculum night as well, which is very similar to open house, where kind of parents can kind of get the sense of what their students will be learning about this year, and how to, interact and help with student learning at home. They also have school photos coming up, so that's always exciting. And then at the South Campus, they had open house as well. And they elected their ASB reps from each of their advisory classes, which is really exciting because it's really great to hear about, student government, especially at that 5-6 level, and finding ways to bring out that student voice. And I'm hoping to find ways that the different ASBs can collaborate. So that's what I have to add about that. Any questions?
Thank you both. I just want to point out how you listed voicing concerns as a form of school spirit. And I really like that because I think it sort of prepares our students for civic involvement as adults, whereas, getting active in civics and politics, even if it's because you see a problem and you want to make it better, like that's a legitimate reason to get involved. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, and I want to note that we've been talking about getting an email to the high school and middle school, I believe, certainly the high school, about what the board's doing. So we can help get them knowing what we're talking about so they can get more involved through y'all. So just for those out there, and I'm really looking forward to that. Yeah. So thank you. We'll move on to the superintendent's report. Dr. Moshe.
Thank you. As promised, and I know it's 10 after 8, but it's my turn. And I'm giving you an update on where we are with our goals and our progress so far. I do want to point out that it's also our annual report to the board on our compliance with the State Board of Education's requirements for full certification. We were, I'm proud to tell you, one of the first districts in. So they approved us in July. You can see we're on the list of schools approved. And this was not just a routine, oh, tell us, that you're meeting the minimum requirements. We filled out probably a 24-page report on all the things that we're doing, making sure that we're offering the appropriate courses and providing the appropriate services. So just wanted to update the board on that. I am going to go through our mission, vision, and goals and the action plans around them, and also what your superintendent has done for the last 2 months. That'll come next. So I want to thank Joe for helping me visualize how to share this information with you, since we are really focused on our vision, mission, and goals, and the board has set goals. As you know, we have a very clear vision, and we see it in action every time we spend any time with our students, in that they are lifelong learners, multiculturally engaged, literate, and active in their community. I think we are truly helping them prepare for life outside of our school district. So there we go. So first goal. And I have all 3 goals listed here, but I'm going to go through each one. And I do have it color coded and outlined in terms of action plan. And green means that we've actually met the the objective, but I'm trying to see how I can, there we go. So all of goal 1, this top section is all about the professional development that we have started this year around creating a culture of care. So as the board knows, we created a team of admin and teachers and support staff and students. And we trained for 4 straight days this summer. And we took that training and worked with this group called RJ Ed, and then trained our entire staff. And Anne was able to join us that day, so she had firsthand training. And since that time, we have continued to work on training staff. We have a monthly training with our teachers and classified staff. And we have seen evidence, and I'm not going to call out specifics, but students are actually in circle. I have, in my personal meetings with staff and with students, have participated in circle. And hopefully we're starting to see a cultural shift so that folks are really taking the time to engage with one another in meaningful ways. That will continue all year long. And as you can see, as I go down to the yellow is in process. So all of this, by the way, all of the training that we're receiving is paid through our professional development funds that come from OSPI that are only to be used for professional development. So this is particularly important when people are wondering about budget and our expenses. So we will continue with this training and then regroup at the end of the year, do a needs assessment and find out how we've done. We also have specific, and you can see them here, specific measurements, for example, that'll come through our CEE survey as to whether or not we've improved in particular areas like where there's a problem in my school, we talk about it and find ways to solve it. And there's a piece in here about finding out about student perception and whether or not they feel that school is a safe place for them. So I'm not going to go through each one of these, but you can look and we will post them online. And we also will be using the SWOT analysis for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats as we go through this process. So before I move off of goal 1 and all that we're doing around this engagement and culture of caring, I'd open it up for any board questions on what we're doing.
This chart makes me very happy. I like the color coding
Excellent. Thank you, Joe.
and the matrix of it. I appreciate it. Thank you, Joe, and Dr. Joe.
Hi, Dr. Joe. And if I could be so bold and put our students on the spot, are you seeing any of this taking place? Audrey, you were trained. Is any of it even starting to happen in your world?
Yeah, I would say there's been a fair amount of circles in, I've seen them a lot in advisories. What I have had is there's been a bit of reluctance to circles. There's been a little, so just going to be honest, there has been some students who are like not super interested in doing a circle and getting up out of their seats to do that. So just putting that out there, but do you have anything to add?
Yeah, for me personally in the circles, I've only done them a handful of times in advisory, and we've had discussion about them in some of my other classes and what students' opinions on the circles are. And like Audrey has said, there's kind of some reluctance to them, but.
Great. But at least you know what they are. So that's a step in the right direction. So thank you for that input.
I want to echo Andrea, and this makes me happy. The layout and the data and the fact that we're getting these reports, I really appreciate you putting in the time, Dr. Moshe, to put this together and present it to us. I think it's very important for us to be able to keep accountable to you for giving you guidance, as well as you being accountable to us for getting the stuff done. So I appreciate that very much.
So just a comment, we are early in the process. We will continue with this work. We do train every month with staff. And our next one's coming up next week, as a matter of fact. So,
And the board will be trained in this in January.
yes, and then we will do a student group in January as well. So goal 2, you're going to see here that it's all yellow right now. We are in process, though I think Susie Richards could probably present to you tonight because she's ready, because she thought it was due today. So anyway, just letting you know that we are in process with our school improvement planning. It's always the same schedule. Those plans will be presented in the workshop format in next meeting, which is October 12th. And then we have accountability measures. We will also provide an update to the board on these plans in January and March, as well as at the end of the year. We're doing a lot of work around inclusionary practices, as well as universally designed instruction. We have a monthly meeting on that, of which I am a part, and the principals are a part, and we have teachers involved. And we're talking again about peer observations. And we have some measurables that are also included in this chart that I know you love. As well as our curriculum adoptions, which you heard about tonight, and you'll be hearing about all of our curriculum, as you mentioned, over the course of the year. And that cycle will continue, and Kayla has taken the lead on that, and I appreciate that. So our third chart has lots of green, and then it's blank because I didn't know what you were going to decide. So we already have in place all of the meetings that went on before now to gather the public's input, to inform the board so that the board could make a decision tonight. So now we will continue to fill this in with the steps we're going to be taking around moving some grade levels. And the bond planning has been in process. Again, we're looking forward to a February vote, but it may be April. Don't want to rush that process, because I think it's really important that it's firmed up and what we need, since we haven't done a bond in a while. So I think it may be February, but it could be as far as out as April. So that's how I'm going to continue updating the board, is through this action planning process. Again, any questions, comments, or helpful criticism, whether it's now or via email from individual board members, I welcome that. Any questions, concerns?
This color is wonderful. It's all beautiful. I would say if I had one tiny opportunity here, would be to maybe make some sort of key for some of the acronyms to continue to be used, just because just because I'm not as updated with some of my words. Like I had a moment where I was like, SWAT, which one is that? And so just having a little key of some of those like really key concepts that are abbreviated here for obvious reasons.
Thank you. Okay.
May I speak briefly to that? My second impression as a brand new board member, my first impression was, oh, what a warm welcome. My second impression was, that is a lot of acronyms.
Yeah. I'm sure you all have jargon in your own worlds. Okay.
I just want,
Striking the set. What's up with that?
we're not punching anything.
Okay, see?
Correct.
I just wanted to check in, and this is a little off the cuff, so if you have to get back to me in email, that's totally fine. I wanted to know if you had any updates on when we were getting, I know it's just one part of it, but assessment data from around the state. I know that we have our districts, but I wanted something to compare it to and get the proper context. Do we know when that's going to be available?
I'm not aware of when it's
Okay.
going to be available.
Yeah, that's
OS
totally fine.
Neither is my administrative team at this time, because our assessment coordinator
Yeah,
took
no
off.
problem.
And OSPI is having a lot of issues with some other systems. And so they're they're not the most responsive on this topic right now.
Yeah, I knew that this wasn't a Dr. Moshe fix this problem.
Yeah.
It was just a, do
They've-
you happen to know?
They very well may not have released it yet. There's some other stuff, like their whole grant system that they're trying to merge. It's not going so well. So.
So I do have a couple more items for you, but I had to switch my screen share. Just a moment, please. Not technical difficulty, it's just a delay. Okay, so what I wanted to update the board on is the activities of the superintendent so that you have a sense of how I spend my days, so that you can know how a superintendent spends days. So what I've put here is the September, just the big ticket items of what I've done weekly, monthly, annually. And I think I will update you on this on a monthly basis so that you can see, because in the future, when you have a different superintendent, you need to know what a superintendent does on their daily, not just in terms of the big picture. So September is always very exciting. There were home games that I was able to attend, one of them being football, which our fan base is very strong. Volleyball games, soccer games, again, lots of school spirit. So weekly, we have an administrator meeting every Tuesday from 8 till usually 10:30. But it's been going later because we have a lot on the plate. And then I spend weekly, I spend at least an hour with each principal in their building, and we visit classes and discuss the day-to-day dealings that we need to talk about. And then, of course, once a week, board leadership. So that's on a weekly basis. Then monthly, I do a variety of things that I make sure are on a monthly cycle. We do, now I'm part of the inclusionary practices team. We meet on a monthly basis. I meet with our entire administrative team, including transportation, food service, Gail Lavasser, tech folks, and so on. I meet with the entire team, including principals, and then each of those individuals once a month. And then, of course, there's superintendent meetings once a month regionally. Then there's an Island County meeting, and I'm also was called upon to mentor the Oak Harbor superintendent because she's new to the region. And I plan to go monthly to leadership class for a circle time on a Tuesday. Told you about PD with Culture of Care. We meet monthly with each union for PRC, or what does it stands for? It's Professional Relations Committee, which is basically just checking in with each union on a monthly basis. We've started it with the district office team as well. Of course, there's board meetings twice a month. And then I've also added to my list this year to meet with the counseling and ESA staff once a month, so that they have some leadership there that is district-wide versus just at the building level. And then our students mentioned the open houses at each of the schools, and I did have the opportunity to go to the club fair. So that was this month. And next month, I anticipate a little bit different. Most
ESA real quick.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's what I don't know.
Educational Support Association. It's basically counselors, psychologists, nursing staff. ESA.
Yeah.
Specialist. Sorry. Now we're gonna
No, so yeah,
associate.
I was more curious about who the group was rather than
Yeah.
necessarily.
So the counseling, obviously, if they're counselors, but we have social worker, we have school psychologists, we have nurse, and so on. So I meet with them monthly, and we're still working on our counseling plan, which was due, but we'll get there. So this next month, it looks very similar, except in October, just reminding the board that I am on the executive board of the Washington State Risk Management Pool. And if you're curious as to what the risk management pool is, this is actually my second of 4 years in that term, and I represent small schools. And we, as most of the districts are in the state of Washington, not all, but most of the districts in the state of Washington are part of this consortium. It's a public entity, and it's essentially a group that is member-owned, member-operated. So superintendents are required to be on their executive board. And it's basically, we're self-insured. It's a pool. And so you can actually go there and look and then see about an executive board, and there I am. So again, that annual meeting comes up next month. And then after that annual meeting is also an executive board meeting, and that happens every other month. So I will be wherever the meeting is for a Monday and a Tuesday in October. So again, I am happy to always share the calendar of the superintendent, but I thought it would be important for the board to know how a great deal of my time is spent on a weekly and monthly basis.
I just want to give a big thank you for that framework, and that's a full-time job on top of the other stuff that you also do that is also a full-time job, and all of those pieces. I will say I've long been a collector of wise words, and a few board meetings ago, you said something akin to sometimes the work gets in the way of the work. And I now use that as my mantra when the fourth person comes into my office and has needs on top of the things that I'm doing. So thank you for all that you do for the district, and know that you are in ink in my wise words collection.
I just appreciate the transparency about bringing what you do to the board. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Moshe. We'll go on to board comments or reports.
I have two. The first one is there was a request to have a board member sit on the inclusionary practices team. And I'm happy to sit on it, but I wanted to offer the opportunity to anyone else who may want to be on it. And so if you have an interest, please let Dr. Moshe know. And if not, I will be happy to be on it. And then the other one was Director Williford. We had just had a conversation about doing a bunch of policies in October. And then I realized I will be accompanying my team to the institutional ed conference in Yakima the last week of October, so I will not be here. So I am happy for that plan to go one of two ways. I'm happy for the four of you to review those policies and have first readings and continue with the path, or I'm happy to revisit the calendar if anybody wants me to.
My thinking on that is we had discussed just doing first readings then, just presenting them to the public. So if you feel comfortable doing that, we could have the discussions in November then.
Sure.
And actually do the work there.
I also cut it down to the first 8 instead of 16, and it actually, we had 17. So it will be 9 in October and then 8 in November or December or whenever you do it. And Christy, you have an
There's no
email
urgency,
with the numbers.
so you also can wait, just putting it out there.
Or we could do 17 all at once. You just let me know.
I would rather not do that with the school improvement plans. Thank you.
Exactly. School improvement plans are the 14th at a workshop.
It would be an entire board sleepover.
I just wanted to let the board know that I unfortunately won't be able to make this next workshop on the 12th, but I will review the recording of the meeting.
You. I would like to ask the board to submit any comments you may have about the really delightful reading, the WASDA General Assembly 2022 Handbook, which I believe I shared via email. This is fascinating. So if you're reading the best new thriller, just put it down and pick up this instead. You'll never get to sleep. But what I would really love to hear is if you have any particular recommendations for me as to voting positions, because I will be participating this Friday and Saturday. It's 2 all-day virtual sessions in the General Assembly. I'll be the voting delegate for our board. So any of you who also wants to spend your day in the online session, please feel free, but I have the voting login credentials. So if one or more of you have a perspective that differs from my perspective, I would love to engage one-on-one in that. I don't think we can engage as a group unless it's this evening. Otherwise, I'll just hear recommendations, and presuming we have some kind of unanimity in perspectives, I will vote that way.
Marnie, anything about funding special education as a priority? Vote. And anything around House Bill 1295, vote. Which has to do with institutional ed and like ensuring that that's fully funded, because right now they don't even talk to me about that funding. And then the regionalization compensation is going to be a really big one for us.
Great. I do have a couple of these specifics flagged. One of my questions related to that, it was something that would particularly give more lift levy limits in a stepwise fashion for smaller schools. So I'm assuming
That's a big yes.
Please
That's
lift.
a big yes.
Great. And then another one that I had some questions about. Oh, yeah, that's the one. It said, ask Dan. So I'm hearing that that's the one.
He's already
Okay,
nodding.
Great. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, the regionalization I wanted to bring up also, and anytime we can talk about prototypical school model or get them to talk about prototypical school model, because it does not work for small school districts.
Mhm.
I've tried this stat out several times, and it's a couple of years old now, but the current prototypical school model for our district would give the nursing staff that we are provided funds for from the state apportionment 5 minutes with each student every year. So we make up the difference with levies, but that just doesn't work for a lot of small districts. So anytime you can press up about the prototypical school model, it might work for large districts, but not for small.
Got it. Very good. Thank you. That meets my needs. Thank you.
And seeing no other people coming forward, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you and good night.